Today's presenters are James Gears, Rehabilitation Program Specialist for the Northwest area, me, Melanie Seckler, Rehabilitation Program Specialist for the East Central area, and Jay Burns, Supervisor of the Provider and Contract Management Unit. He'll actually just be assisting with some of the questions and answers and jumping in if he has anything to add. But I'll be starting the training and then Jim will be following up after me. Today, we're going to provide an introduction to Summer Youth Services, discuss health and safety, provide answers to frequently asked questions, and review a sample report and answer your questions. So this is the agenda for the meeting today. We would like to thank you for joining us today. Our participants are very lucky to have job coaches with a wide variety of backgrounds and experiences. Some of you provide job coaching year-round. Some provide job coaching on a seasonal basis and might be returning for your second, fifth, or 10th year. And for others, this will be your first experience. You might be a teacher, a college student, or work in another industry. Your background and experiences will serve you well while working with students with disabilities to learn about employment. Whatever your experience is with Summer Youth Services, please know that every year is different, and this year is no exception. And now we will talk about the purpose of Summer Youth Services. These services are utilized to teach students and youth with disabilities vocational skills and appropriate work behaviors, budgeting, time management, job seeking skills training, and development of vocational interests. Job coaches are an integral part of the service. You set the expectations and lay the foundation for future employment. Good work habits start with you. What we mean by this is that the participants, the students, they're going to be looking to their job coaches to learn how to work. That includes the dress code. They're going to make sure you're dressed appropriately and they're going to model you. They're going to look at your attendance. Are you showing up on time? Are you taking your breaks in the allotted time? What is your language? Are you using appropriate language? Are you using person-first language? Are you cursing or, hopefully not, but we want to make sure that you have model behavior so that the kids know what to expect and know how to act on the job. You shouldn't be on your cell phone throughout the service, just like the kids shouldn't be on their cell phone. They shouldn't be spending their work time texting friends and doing FaceTime and things like that, and neither should the job coaches. So really, they're going to look to you to see what they need to do, not just for this service, but for all their future positions. They're really going to remember this experience and use what they learned here in the future jobs. Summer Youth Services, pre-employment transition services, or what we call pre-ETs. These are intended to help students with disabilities as early as age 14 who could benefit from an early start in exploring career interests. These services are available to those who may need a remote service option this year. And these services include instruction in self-advocacy, counseling on post-secondary opportunities, work-based learning, workplace readiness training, and job exploration counseling. So although we know that pre-ETs are happening during the summer, this is not the focus of this training. If providers haven't been approved for pre-ETs yet, but are interested in providing the service in the future, you can find more information at OOD's website under the Information for Providers tab. Pre-ETs training is available on demand. Our Summer Youth Services work experiences. These services are designed for students with disabilities who are getting ready for the workforce and are ready for practical experience. These work experiences will help the students meet employer expectations for quality and quantity of work and work behaviors, build upon communication and interpersonal skills, and it will help them identify areas of vocational interest. Our provider staff requirements include a background check for all staff working with minors. This is a requirement of CARF. So if the provider is CARF accredited, you have to have a background check for all the staff working with the minors. They must maintain no more than a 1-to-4 ratio, and that is 1 staff to 4 participants in a group. This group would not include teachers, parents, personal care aides, etc. Those do not count toward the ratio. So if you have a student who has a personal care aide with them to assist with those personal care needs, that personal care aide should not be job coaching. They are not part of that ratio. Um, you must remain on site and supervise youth for the entire duration of the service. The youth should not be dropped off by a job coach so that the job coach could go pick up somebody else. The youth are not being supervised by the managers of the work site. The provider staff must be the ones supervising the youth. They must be available to the youth, so not in a different building or on their cell phone. The youth shouldn't be working out on the sales floor while the provider staff is in the break room typing up notes from the day before. And again, going back to what we said earlier, the provider staff must set a good example. The kids are watching you and they're learning from you how to be a good employee. So the service is going to start off with an orientation day. And the orientation day should take place in person at the work site during the first full day or at a provider office or another secure community location if the work site does not have available space. And what this means is we don't want you to go to the park and sit on a park bench and have a 4-hour day out where other people in the community might be able to hear the discussion that's going on. You might be talking about some private things. You might be doing some role playing and different things like that. And it wouldn't be appropriate to be out in the open where it's a location that's not secure. So we're looking at maybe a meeting room at a library. Again, if you have an office, it could be at your office. You might rent a room from a local college or have some other type of space available to you if you cannot be at the work site. The orientation day should mimic a first real day at work, and it should include onboarding activities such as reviewing employee responsibilities, the behavioral expectations, work site safety guidelines, work tasks, key contacts, call-off procedures, when and how to receive a paycheck, work site tours, staff and department meet and greets, and other essential information. If the regarding behavioral expectations, you should let them know what the consequences are if they're not following instructions, if they're playing around, if there's conflict within the group. The students always want to know when they're going to get paid. Their parents want to know when they're going to get paid, and they should have a schedule of when that's going to happen. And our students also need to know how to call off work if that's going to happen. And if for some reason you have a student that misses that orientation day, they should, when they return, hopefully the next day or start the next day, they should have that information at their hands. They might not get the full day experience that you had with the rest of the group, but they should at least have information about, you know, again, the expectations, safety guidelines, call-off procedures, etc. For the rest of the time, if your onboarding activities don't take up that full time, you can use curriculum from Skills to Pay the Bills or other OOD approved curriculum. And those curriculum go over things like teamwork, communication, and other valuable soft skills that they can use on the job. And we have a link here on the presentation that will take you to the Department of Labor website where you can find that free curriculum. Our work sites should have a sufficient amount of work to accommodate the participants. The participants should have the appropriate equipment like safety glasses, gloves, masks, etc. Participants are not employees of the host business. Work sites must follow the Ohio Department of Health guidelines. And just as a reminder, the last day to send worksite updates using the 2021 Summer Youth Site Collection List to PCMU will be May 28th. So that's the last Friday of this month. In previous years, there were situations in which the job site did not have sufficient work and where individuals were idle or sent home. So providers should carefully review these sites to determine whether they should be utilized. Now we know these sites are already pretty much locked in for this year, but you just need to make sure with the managers of those work sites that there will be enough work for your students. Providers need to plan for weather if they're going to be working outside. So what type of job tasks can be performed when it's raining? It's not acceptable to fill in time with card games, movies, coloring in coloring books, etc. So you should ask the business, what would your employees be doing if it were raining? So what should the kids be doing, if they can't work outside for that time? Providers should discuss job tasks with parents and guardians to ensure that participants are capable of safely performing job tasks, such as running weed trimmers, lawnmowers, etc. Participants who demonstrated that they cannot perform job tasks safely need to be moved to other duties or change sites. Businesses need to maintain enough employees to run their business independent of summer youth individuals. So again, our participants are not the employees of the host business. And if there's, let's say, 5 normal employees or the employees of the business that typically work, that manager shouldn't have just one regular employee and then expect our participants to fill in for the remainder, for the extra 4. So they should run independent of our students. And be sure to follow the Ohio Department of Health guidelines, have access to hand washing, hand sanitizer, allow for social distancing, and make sure everybody's wearing face masks as required. Regarding the schedules, service time starts when the participants are at the job site. The schedule should match the approved site collection tool. If there's any change in those schedules, you need to contact the counselor once the service is started. Providers are required to notify VR staff if session dates, times, locations change. We need to always know where those students are. We should not be surprised by a phone call from a parent, or sometimes the parents go to the teachers at the student's school and then we hear it from them. So we need to know from the providers if any of these things change. And in most cases, we need to be able to give our approval on that. Providers should ensure that participants are not working over their scheduled times. Daily activities should be planned in advance. And what this means is you shouldn't show up to the work site with the students and then spend the first 15 minutes trying to figure out from the manager what the student should be doing with that time. You should go in knowing what the kids are going to be doing and have a plan for that day. The actual scheduled service time must be entered on the report form, and we'll be reviewing those forms a little bit later on. And the form must also list the number of service hours per week. Now for the unpaid meal breaks, minor labor laws require a 30-minute unpaid meal period if working more than 5 hours. OOD's requirement is that minors scheduled over the entirety of 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. to 6:30 p.m. must be given a 30-minute unpaid meal period. Meal periods are unpaid and they are not included in the service time. I have been reviewing the site list schedules, and at any time I've had any kind of a question about that, I've gone back to the provider and we've made corrections. Um, this year will be slightly tricky because you can prorate. We're not having a solid, you must work 20 hours a week. We're allowing you to work between 12 and 20 hours. So you just really need to pay attention to those meal breaks because it's not an automatic built into the schedule, or it might not be obvious to me looking at the site collection tool if you have less than 20 hours, but maybe you're working 11 to 2. So in those cases, I try to go back to the provider to make sure that they're including that half-hour meal period. So just keep an eye on that and make sure that the kids are getting those meal breaks. Okay, and we'll talk about health and safety now. So we do have significant incident reports, and we'll be reviewing the actual report form in a few minutes. Providers must notify OOD immediately of safety and health concerns. Providers must speak with a counselor or coordinator, VR supervisor, or area manager. You should not leave a voicemail message. And by you should not, you do not leave a voicemail message. You must talk to somebody if there is a health and safety concern. Providers must use OOD standardized incident report form. You'll email the completed form within 24 hours to the counselor or coordinator and copy PCMU at ood.ohio.gov. If there is an incident that requires reporting to DODD, Children's Services, etc., the provider staff must make that report because they either witnessed the incident or have firsthand knowledge. VR staff cannot make that report. So if you send us a significant incident report and there's something very concerning on there that needs to go to DODD, for instance, our staff cannot take that report and then contact DODD. The provider must be the one to do it. Safety issues may require a pause in services until they can be resolved, and that's something that you'll discuss with the counselor or coordinator. You need to notify VR staff of issues, such as if there's any changes. So if a provider has changes in service dates or work locations, you must obtain approval of changes from VR staff as soon as possible, but prior to any changes being made. This can mean maybe there's a heavy storm and the electric is out and now you can't go to that work site. You need to let the VR staff know if you're changing a work location. Let them know if there's any emergencies, parent concerns, or if you have concerns about the participants' well-being. So we know that these are challenging times. Sometimes our students will talk to their job coaches because they trust you. They're seeing you every day. They want to confide in you. If there's something going on related to their well-being, if there's any concern, you must let the VR staff know so that we can get involved and handle it appropriately. The significant incident report form is something that needs to be filled out when a participant has been injured or has caused injury to someone else. If a participant has reported abuse in their household or place of residence, or provider staff has observed abusive behavior. A participant is the target of harassment or they harass another individual, including allegations of harassment. The participant sexually harasses another individual or is the recipient of sexual harassment. These are all instances where a significant report form should be filled out. And this is the report form. You can find it at OOD's website at ood.ohio.gov. Click on the Information for Providers tab. Click on Provider Forms, and you'll find this at number Form 16. So this first page gives instructions on how to use the form. This is confidential, so there will be confidential information on here. So when you send it to VR staff in the PCMU email box, you need to send that through secure mail or what's called Zix mail or secure fax. You need to contact an OOD staff member within 24 hours. And if an OOD staff member cannot be reached during business hours, you need to try to contact a different OOD employee. If you don't know who that employee's supervisor is, you can go to your liaison supervisor or go to the area manager. If you're not sure about whether a SURF is needed, you can contact OOD to report the incident and ask for further instructions. This is the first actual page of the form where you put the participant's information in the top part. If there's a guardian, please list the name of the guardian and the phone number, the VRC assigned to the case. The age is extremely helpful. And if you can also notate whether or not the individual is DD eligible, if you know that information. The next section is where you'll talk about the incident. You'll want to put the date, time, and location. Describe the incident as much as you can. If there is another individual involved in the incident, do not put their name. If you have their participant ID number, you can list that. Otherwise, we're going to be putting this in the file of the participant, so we don't want other people's information in that file. You want to describe the injury in as much as you can. State whether or not there were any witnesses and if medical treatment was provided and how or where. Was it something on site? Did you just have to administer like basic first aid, give them a Band-Aid? Did they have to go to urgent care, hospital, etc.? The next page is what action did you take to ensure the health and safety of the participants and the outcome? So once this incident happened, how did you assist with that? Then we need your information. Who is submitting the report? What is their job title? What's the provider name? So who does the individual work for? The provider address, phone number, email, and please do not forget to sign this. We get a lot of these where the provider or the person completing the form did not sign it. So just make sure that you get all the boxes filled out. Then the next section, more toward the middle and the bottom, is who did you notify at OOD and who notified the entity and the date. What OOD staff was contacted, and if you couldn't reach the counselor coordinator, who else did you try to contact? The supervisor, area manager, etc. So going back to that entity notified, that's if you needed to contact DODD, child services, law enforcement, that's where you would list that. I apologize. I think I said that incorrectly. So you want to put that under the entity notified, who notified that entity, and then below that is where you list OOD staff. The very bottom section that says OOD staff use only, that's what we'll complete when we receive this form. And now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jim. He's going to discuss some frequently asked questions and provide answers.
Thanks, Melanie. As Melanie kind of indicated, I mean, summer youth is a major service and a major thing that OOD and providers do each year. So we realize that there's often a lot of questions. What we try to do is come up with some of the questions that we thought providers might have, or questions that providers have already sent to us for some responses. So the first one, we're going to look at some questions on transportation, and then also the report and the invoice, and then we'll actually have a copy of the report up there to kind of show you what that looks like. The first, and we are getting a lot of questions in regards to transportation. I think what OOD wants to get across is that OOD is not creating new guidelines. We are deferring providers back to the guidance that's been issued by the Ohio Department of Health and for services. And then if it's a public transportation provider, then the Ohio Public Transportation or Transit Authority has issued some guidance there. So providers are just referred back to the Ohio Department of Health to see their guidance. OOD is not issuing any separate guidance from that. Melanie did include a link of that in the PowerPoint presentation. So when we post that, you'll have access to that as well. One of the things we do realize is things are changing every day. We do understand that between now and the time that you offer your summer youth services, the Ohio Department of Health may change their guidance on what they're requiring as far as businesses. So we are encouraging providers to keep updated and keep looking at that. As more information comes out, we will kind of be watching that as well. It may change or it may continue on with the guidance that we have. The other thing is looking at participation in summer youth services. I think that counselors need to have a discussion with participants about what other options that they might have for transportation. I know in the past it's been very convenient because providers were able to do that, and we would maybe not explore some of these other options as much as we could have. But now we're asking staff to look at, do they have their own transportation? Can they get family members? Is it a parent, an older brother or sister transport these students for services? Is there other public transportation that's available? Bus passes, cab fare or something like that we can use to get people to the services that they need. All right, we'll go to the next slide. We get some specific questions each year about how to document transportation. So we want to try to take this opportunity to kind of clarify that, to make sure that there's no issues when you go to bill that. We do have a transportation report. The way that the transportation report is set up is that a provider can bill transportation before and after the actual service itself. So getting the student to the work site is known as transportation. What you do is you would go ahead and start that transportation when you pick that first student up, and transportation ends when they get to the job site. As a reminder, OOD does have a requirement that transportation for summer youth participants should not exceed 1 hour. The reason we do that is we have a strong that students need to arrive to the job site awake, alert, refreshed. If they're sitting in the car for an hour and a half, they get tired, they get bored. It's not their best showing when they get to the job site. If these students were to get a job in the community, they would get a job that's close to their home. They wouldn't be traveling an hour for that job. So that's why we have that requirement, and we just need to make sure. So when you're planning your transportation routes, give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. We understand that occasionally something might happen, and there's a traffic accident, the road is closed, whatever the case may be. What we would ask, if that does occur, you need to document somewhere on that report why that exceeded that 1 hour, and we would not expect it to exceed it by a lot. But if you provide an explanation for us, then we can kind of see what was going on there. And it shouldn't be something that happens frequently. If you know that there's road construction taking place near your job site, you may need to look at, is there an alternative route that we can avoid the construction altogether? We get some questions each year. Some providers will go out and pick up students in the community from their homes, and then they bring them into this centralized kind of like a staging area. So what happens, how we would see that transportation on the report is the time that you pick the student up, the time that you have them in the car, you get to the staging area, that would be one set of transportation. And then from the staging area, since you're getting, typically these are providers who have larger vehicles, whether they're large passenger vans or buses or something like that. Once you get to that staging area, then you would do another set of transportation because you have a new set of students in there. So it's probably changing your group size, it's changing things like that. So you would enter that as a new entry for transportation. We would still expect that transportation from the student's home to that staging point to the job site to still be within 1 hour of time. Like I say, we're really not wanting students to be sitting around idle, getting distracted, getting bored, and things like that, so that they're not able to put their best foot forward on the job site. The other question we get sometimes is, does the service area modifier, the SAM rate, apply for Summer Youth Service? The answer to that is it depends. It depends on where the actual student lives, not the actual work site. So if the provider serves the county where the student lives, then the SAM rate would not apply. Now, for counselors, we would tell you to go ahead and look at where that student lives and find the providers that are in that community. We should not be authorizing for SAM, the service area modifier, unless there are no providers that can serve that person in the county. So if there are other providers available, we would not be authorizing SAM. So SAM should really be very rare occurrence in there, unless there was something specific that the counselor needed to address, and they make sure that they document that and aware why we would be doing that. Okay. Question we get from providers is often that they look at the transportation we only have authorized for one unit of service. The reason we do that is as a placeholder. We recognize that you won't know what you're using for that individual until after the service has been completed. We use that as a placeholder so that we can issue the authorization. But when it comes back into us, you would go ahead and bill us according to the way that you provided the service on the report, and we will go ahead and make an adjustment to the authorization there. We do not need to send you an amended authorization saying that you've increased the time, because we know going into it that you're going to correct it at the time of billing. We often get this question as well: is some of the work sites that providers have found have travel involved with them. One of the common ones we get are students who are working at the Parks Department or something like that, and the Parks Department will be going through various parks that they have within their system. So there's some travel time between the parks. Two things that we really want to focus on: one, the transportation rules still apply to those youth, and then the second is that transportation time is part of the service. The parks employees themselves are being paid to go to between the different sites or facilities. So we would treat the students as similar to that park employee, and we would go ahead and pay them. That would be part of the service that the youth would be participating in. So part of that, however, you set that up 4 or 5 hours for the day. Kind of look at some of the questions that we get with reports and billing. And I know Jay's kind of answering some questions as they come in. We can also see if there's anything after that we can address as well. All right. So far as the reports and the billing, we do have a new report invoice for this year. Every year we do have to change the summer youth report based on some of the changes that occur. Last year we had a simplified report for foundations. We kind of put that together really quickly because of all the changes. We got a lot of positive feedback on that, so we tried to keep that form as much as possible as the foundation report. But since we are using it for the vocational training stipend and no additional form is going to be required, we did have to make some updates to that. So when we're looking at the report, we're going to have the template up there here in a couple of slides. But if a student misses more than 2 days, it's important that you contact the counselor. So the question is, how do you document if a student drops out of a service or that? But if a student's missing more than 2 days, there's a responsibility of the provider to talk to the counselor, and the counselor has to make a decision on whether that student's going to be allowed to come back into that service or not. We're looking at a 4 to 5 week services dependent on the provider. And if student is missing 2 days and it's unplanned, that's a concern. How would they function on a job site if they're missing that much work? Now, there are cases where, we may know about the absences in advance. If a family's taking a family vacation and the counselor's aware of it, they say that's fine. Then we don't have to be told because the counselor already knows about that. There are situations too where somebody might be sick. It's possible to be sick more than 1 day, and if that's the case, the counselor can continue that person in the service. We just want to be aware of it so that the counselor can kind of reach out to that student and say, hey, I noticed you've been missing a couple of days here. Is there anything going on? Could be a transportation issue. If the youth says, I really wanted to go, but I can't get there, then the counselor can kind of work with them to resolve that and get them back into services. But as far as someone being removed or dropped out of a service, if a student participates at any point in time during that week, so if they're there for the day, 1 day during the week, the provider does not make any adjustment on the report template. There's only one spot on the template to list the group size, and that's always going to be the maximum number of students, up to 4 per group, that participated in that service during the week. If a student does get removed, so say the student missed a couple days during this week, the counselor said, yeah, the student's really not interested in pursuing this, we're going to take them out of the service. If they don't participate at all, so that counselor has removed that student from the group, so the next Monday, for example, you have a group size, your original group was 4. On the next Monday, your group size would change to 3. That will rebalance the rates for the students and make sure that the provider is being compensated appropriately. So we only make the change at the end of a complete week before the next week starts. We often get to situations where providers might have a student who's participating in service, and one student, maybe it's a smaller site where they only have 2 students there. Maybe that's what the employer could accommodate, but then the one student decides they don't want to participate, or something happens that they can't participate and they drop out. Providers often ask us how we should handle those situations. We're going to look at it in 2 different ways. One is we're going to look at, is there another site that student could be moved into and transitioned to? So that would be a consideration. But if not, then the counselor can go ahead and adjust the rates and move that up to an individual rate for that one student. Some of the things that we need to consider when we're moving students to another group is, group sizes, distance of work sites from the person's home, actual types of job tasks. If those job tasks would be challenging for the participant and that would not result in a good service, that would be a reason why we may not move that person to another group. Or if it's adds another 20 minutes to their travel time, that might be a reason we would not combine somebody with a group. Um, but if we haven't said it already, communication is the key. Communicating to the counselor as soon as possible what's going on so that you and the counselor can work together to make sure that it is appropriate. We do have some situations where we do approve an individual rate for a student. That needs to be disability related or specific vocationally related. We may have a situation where you actually have a group of students on a job site where there's 4 people in the group. These 3 students have one job coach. This one individual, even though they're working at the same job site with everybody else, maybe their disability needs are higher, that they need more intensive supervision. We can go ahead and authorize an individual rate so that that person can have a one-on-one job coach, but they're still participating at a group site. So that there again is a conversation with the counselor depending on what the needs of the individual are. All right, go to our next slide. We often get questions from providers about when we're going to be done authorizing for summer youth. I'll say that's probably sometime in August. All joking aside, we get students coming in for services all the time. If we're able to get a student into a summer youth service, we will continue to go ahead and authorize. Just a couple important dates to kind of look at. We started authorizing for summer youth work experiences on April 1st. We would hope that at this point in time, we're in the second week of May, that most of them have been issued already, but we do know that some students are still coming in. We don't have a cutoff or a deadline. We will work with providers to see if we can get someone into a service, but that doesn't mean that a provider can't set a date that you're no longer taking referrals. If you're not able to kind of plan or coordinate that service, you just need to tell the counselor, well, thank you for that opportunity. Unfortunately, all our sites are full, or we can't add somebody into a site at this point in time. We've already made commitments to the employer or business, whatever the case may be. You can do that. We are asking providers to let our staff know or communicate to us when their sites are full. Melanie does a great job sending out the site list to counselors each week based on updates that the providers send to the PCMU mailbox. So we're trying to keep ahead of that as much as possible so we don't get in this situation where somebody's trying to refer someone to a site that may have been closed off already. We also get some questions each year about partial billings. Providers are allowed to bill us up to twice during the summer youth work experiences. So providers can decide when they're going to do that. You may decide to break it between weeks 2 and 3 or between weeks 3 and 4. That's up to you. As long as it's only twice during the summer, we can handle that. The reason we do that is we just can't have people sending in billings more frequently than that. It is very important to understand that if you are doing a partial billing and a final billing, that there are some requirements on the form so that you before those forms will work for you properly. So when we get to the forms, we'll look at that specifically. The pre-ETS services, if you are a provider offering that during the summer, we're not making any changes to the pre-ETS process. We're going to continue on with the same process we have for billing those services. So make sure that it's the same as if you were providing the service during the school year. And the last question that we often get from our staff is, can we go ahead and pay the final invoice before the staffing is completed? And the answer to that is yes. We understand that a lot of times this staffing will not take place until later in the fall. Sometimes teachers want to be part of that staffing, so it may take place in August or September after school has started. So we're not going to hold up paying the provider for that. On the same token, the providers do need to understand that it is a requirement in the VRP schedule, and it is something that you have to do at a later date. So we're not going to hold up your invoice, but as long as you agree to and understand that you have to do this at some other point in time. We really try to encourage people to try to set those staffings up before school is out So if the teachers want to be there, if you can set that staffing up now, say, okay, teachers are going to come back to work on August 22nd, you maybe on the 25th or something like that, you've already got your staffing set up. Anything that you can do to kind of facilitate that now is just going to be a lot easier than rather than waiting until August 22nd and then emailing and teachers say, hey, when do you have time available to do that? As far as reports and billings, many providers are aware that our monitoring and compliance unit does a review of summer youth services each year. It's more of a proactive review. In some cases, there may be some issues that we identified. We ask them to look at a provider, but as a whole, we pick a random sample of job or summer youth work experience reports to just kind of look at them, make sure that the services that we are receiving are the best that students can possibly get. The goal of those is to just help providers improve for the next year. But when we look at that, one of the common areas that our monitoring and compliance unit identifies is that sometimes reports are submitted and it looks like they're done rather quickly, they're sent in rather quickly, and there may not be some level of checking internally to the provider. So we do encourage providers to have a system in place that the job coach fills out the template, that there's some sort of a review either at the fiscal level or the program level within your agency to make sure that it makes sense before you submit it to us. It just saves us time sending it back to you for some updates and then you sending back. That delays your payment. And it also creates additional work for your staff and OOD. So we just want to make sure that that process is streamlined as possible. What they should really be looking for is inconsistencies. Making sure that if a student is not there, that it's documented that they're not there, that that the report template itself is filled out completely. We've added some features to the report template to make sure that if something is not filled out completely, that it's not going to calculate for you, so that you can kind of look at that and say, hey, that box doesn't have a number in there, so I must have missed something. So we look at that. The other thing is very concerned about cut and paste reports. And when we talk about cut and paste reports, we understand that the students are going to be doing the same job duties or similar job duties as everybody else. But every year when we get these reports, we have reports where students' names are not correct, or they'll be talking about a boy and this is a young lady's report, and just things like that. It's clear that it's been cut out or used several times for several different reports. Some of the other things we've seen in the past that's been an issue is like we look at the report and it's like 3 or 4 or 5 days may have the exact same narrative. Nobody has the same day over and over and over again. There's going to be something different about that, or something that's unique about that day that our job coach can talk about. We'll talk a little bit about that when we get to the report template as well. The other thing is we are really trying to get these, and it is a requirement, so it's something that all providers should be striving for, is getting these reports and invoices to us within 21 days. We're looking at some of the services, some providers we looked at on the job supports. One of that was a common issue that our monitoring compliance unit identified, is that we're not getting reports and invoices within the 21 days. We will still pay them up to the 90 days, but it is something that we're looking at as something to do a little bit better at. We want all the summer youth invoices and reports by September 30th. We would like to get you paid as a provider by September 30th. We understand that sometimes there's a little bit of back and forth if we have to send it back for some additional information or a correction. We're really trying to make sure that we don't have those situations. But even if you get something sent back to you, there is a time frame that you are supposed to send that back to OOD. So looking at making sure that that's done. One of the things we do want to kind of talk about, if in the fall, you've kind of heard in various sources that we are moving towards a vendor portal system. In the future, if you're billing after We don't have a set date at this point in time, but it's going to be something we let providers know. It's going to be a phased rollout starting in the fall. But if you are in that vendor portal, that may change the way that you submit your invoices to us. We're kind of eliminating that centralized fax box with the portal, but we will be communicating that as more developments come along with that. But if you get your bills in August, you should be okay. In August, will be within 21 days for most students. Even in early September for students who finish the service in August, we should be okay. All right, next slide. We get some miscellaneous questions each year. One of the ones is about smoking. Is it okay if my student vapes, uses e-cigarettes? Any tobacco usage, whether it's vaping or cigarettes or e-cigarettes, any of those type of products, students are not allowed to use those while they're participating in summer youth. We get a question each year. We understand that, this is there are a lot of moving parts in this. Sometimes sites have to change. We had a situation where, a business had an issue that they had to close down temporarily. A couple years ago, power was out for a couple of days in Columbus. We've had issues where, there may just not be enough work for the students there. If there is a situation that you have to change the schedule or change the work site, providers are required to notify the counselors. A lot of times we have to, as far in advance as you can, because we might need to make alternative arrangements for transportation and things like that. What we're asking you, how we're asking you to do that, is we want you to make a telephone call to the counselor so that they know, but then follow up with an email and copy your liaison, your provider liaison. So each provider has a liaison. Your VR manager should know who that is. Just making sure that you're copying that person and we can make sure that that information gets out. Another question we've gotten in the past is, as the students are getting paid for the summer youth work experience, there's a question about, will that impact parent benefits? The answer is typically no, but it depends on the type of benefits we're looking at. SSI and SSDI, the child's earning is not going to impact the parents' earning if they're on SSI or SSDI. Where it may have some impact is if someone is getting the food stamp benefits. That is based on household income. So they will have to report that to Jobs and Family Services. Some of the other benefit types that people might be looking at is housing benefits. Typically, it doesn't impact housing because there is a disregard for income when someone goes back to work for 12 months. So the students wouldn't be impacted by that. We encourage, if people have questions, to have a work incentive plan completed. Maybe working with them to help them understand that. But definitely they will need to report it for Job and Family Services if that family is receiving food stamps. Now, it is a very negligible drop, and it would only be temporary while they're earning that. So the wages themselves will offset any loss that they might have in benefits in most cases. We do have a letter that our counselors can provide to the students so that they can take that to Jobs and Family Services, just letting them know that they're participating in a summer youth work experience program and a little bit about the services. Oops, sorry here. The next question we get is, can participants waive the vocational training stipend? They can with the counselor's permission. But again, going back to that, it should have a very negligible impact on most people's benefits. Like I say, food stamps are probably the only one that I can think of offhand. It would depend on that individual's unique situation. A lot of times is people just don't understand that. Yeah. So having a conversation with the participant saying, you know, this is what you need to do and you're going to be better off by having these wages. People are more comfortable with that. If the family and the student are adamant that they don't want that, with the counselor permission, they can go ahead and waive that. Next question we have is, this is kind of a common question as well. Do the job coaches have to have the students in their site at all times? Our answer to that is no, with some qualifications. We understand that job coaches are working with a small group of maybe up to 4 students, and they're not going to have every student in their site at all times. But it's important is that job coach within a range that they could assist that student if they have a problem. So our example is, you know, if a job coach is working someone in a large retail store, and you know maybe students are in the next aisle over, that's fine. That those kids are not in the direct sight of the job coach at all times. But if the kid were to yell or say hey, or kind of walk around the corner and could get the job coach, that's acceptable. What we don't like to see is if someone is in a large facility where we've had this question come up, you know, the job coach is with the student on the first floor, and a student is on the 4th floor cleaning a room or an office on the 4th floor. That job coach is not accessible to that student, so that is a problem. We would not allow that, because if something were to happen, that youth would not be able to yell or it may take some while for them to get down to the 1st floor and talk to the job coach. It is important to note that if the job coach is not going to be inside of the student, let the students know. You know, if the job coach is going in the next aisle over in the store, just tell the youth, hey, I'm going to be over in the next aisle, so that if they do have a problem, they know where to go. Questions about when students are paid. Melanie did a nice job of addressing this. They can be paid at the end of the service. The important thing that we're really asking providers to do is to tell the students when they are getting paid, so that they know. We get a lot of calls from parents or students and say, hey, I worked my first day of work, where's my paycheck? It's like, okay, it doesn't really work that way in the real world. You have to wait. So, you know, if you're going to pay them the same that you pay your employees every 2 weeks, that's fine. Let them know what the payday is. The other thing is, if you pay once at the end of the service, just let them know you're going to get one check at the end of the service. We're okay with that as long as the student understands and knows when they should be getting paid. Melanie kind of talked about this one, I think, before, about transporting students. You know, we had gotten a question is like, can I go out, get a student, take them to the job site, drop them off, go run out and get another student, bring them back to the job site? We would not allow that. Our concern with that is who is supervising that student while the job coach went out to get that other student. It's not the host business's responsibility to monitor and manage the students. If you have a more specific question on how that might look, then we would encourage you to go ahead and send us the specifics to the PCM email box, and we kind of take a look at it. But typically, we are not going to approve anything where a student is left unattended on a job site, and the job coach is not available to that student if there was a problem. All right, so now we're going to get into the sample report. Hopefully this kind of looks very similar to the report that we had last year. The top part should never change. It's the typical invoice. We did add some additional tabs to the report template this year just to kind of help. We added an instruction tab with some tips. We also added a sample report in there. But this top part is the same as all our other ones. If you see red text in the report itself, that means that that is a field that is not editable by the provider. That is filled out based on an entry that you have made somewhere else in the report. we often get the comment as I can't edit the service start date field. That's because it's looking at the body of the report and saying, on the first entry for the service, what day did that occur? So it's pulling it directly from the report template itself. Okay, towards the bottom of this, you can kind of see, whoops. There's several fields that Melanie kind of talked about we need you to have filled out. Each week is set as a block of services because each week can change. We have given providers the ability to adjust to meet the employer business needs and also their needs as a provider. So not everybody has the same standard thing that we've had in the past. Services can be up to 12 to 20 hours during the week. What we're going to be asking you to do is enter the time in this first block that says the work time, the start and end time. That's the time that the session is taking place. So if your work is scheduled from 9 to noon, that's what's going to go in that field. The number of students participating is always going to be 1 to 4, and that determines the rate for the week. It's always going to be the highest number of students who participate in that service for the week. Now, if you need to change that during the week, maybe you started off with 2 students and all of a sudden, because somebody didn't show up for the first 2 days, counselor says, yeah, it's okay, let them back in. Then you have a 3rd student added on Wednesday. You would change that from 2 from the beginning of the week to 3 because that's the highest number of students per week. The actual number of hours you work is how it's going to figure your proration. It's a very simple formula. It's the number of hours that the students were available to work. This is not what the individual student worked. It's the number of hours that the students were available to work divided by 20. And then we apply that to the rate for that group size. If everything in your table is right, you will be looking in there, and I can't see the number. I think it's G, but you would be looking at this red $372.69. That tells you that everything in that report for that week is correct. If you do not get a rate populated in there, it means that you missed something. This is kind of our safety check to make sure that everything is getting answered. If something is not answered, then it's not going to do that. One of the things that we did make sure that you can do is that you can cut and paste. So if you're working in a Word document, say you have all your job tasks in a Word document, you can go ahead and cut and paste that into the report template. That larger field off to the left-hand side. I'm sorry, right-hand side. Can't tell my left and right today. The right-hand side will expand if you paste it in correctly. What you're going to do is you're going to want to make sure that you paste it to match the destination formula. There's instructions, there's guidance or a tip on the instructions tab. If it does not expand, that is the reason why you pasted it in there in a different way. You still have the ability to go ahead to the left-hand side and drag the field down so that it will show everything, but it's just simpler if you go ahead and if you're doing it in Word, when you paste it in there, you paste it in with that max mirror destination formatting. It's the one that looks like a clipboard. There's a picture of the icon on the instruction page, but it's clipboard with some blue lettering. All right. Okay, if we go to the next page. When we have the individual start time and end time, that is what the student actually worked. This is what that second and third column is what's calculating the VTS for that student. So that is the time that the student was actually there, participated, not the time that the session was scheduled. So if a student arrives late, leaves early, it takes more than the paid break, or if you have it scheduled over a time that you have to give the unpaid meal break, those are the times that you're going to put in there. If you have that less time column is for the unpaid meal break. So if you're looking at scheduling that, It needs to be 30 minutes, so you would put in there 30 minutes in the less billable time. It will take off 5 units of service. One of the things, if someone is working 4 hours, they get the paid 15-minute break. That is not something that you would need to put in the less billable time. That's included in the service. This would be only for any additional breaks. We have some students that, based on their disability-related need, maybe they need to take a 10-minute break outside of the regular breaks. That's fine. You can do that. We just would not pay that student. That would mirror what they would be receiving as a reasonable accommodation on the job site. One of the things we do kind of recommend is, if you're doing that, make sure that it's in an increment of 6, because that's what a unit of service is. So, somebody can have an extra 12 minutes or an extra 18-minute break. The 30-minute break falls evenly divided by 6, so that's not a problem. And that will recalculate their VTS. The other thing is making sure that the participant, the person who's providing the service, has initials. And here is some sample narratives of what a report might look. Like I say, there is a sample on the actual report template itself you can kind of take a look at. We highly encourage providers to document as you're going along. If you document what you did that day, it only takes about 5 minutes to write that little paragraph. If you wait to the end of the summer and you're trying to scroll through your notes and look through papers and stuff like that, and remember, what did we do on that day 2 weeks ago? You're going to have a lot more trouble doing that, and it's going to take you a lot more time. Really encourage you, just do it as you go along. Oops. Totals there. Like I say, anything that's red will is something that a provider can't edit. It'll calculate it for you. If something doesn't calculate, look at it. There are some situations where times may not calculate. If you put in 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock and there's a 0 in the unit, the time for the units of service, that probably means that you got 9 a.m. as the start time and 12 a.m. at the end time. So it's an AM PM issue. The report template is designed to catch that. It will not calculate for you. If you don't put a date or a start time or a date and an end time, it won't calculate as well. So there again, if something is not calculating, the first thing you need to do is look at, is that line filled out correctly, or all the lines filled out correctly within that table. The final summary is at the end of the report. That's our next slide. The final summary is only required if it is the last report. So if you are billing a partial invoice between weeks 2 and 3, you need to make sure that you're selecting partial in there, and it will not check. Otherwise, if it's marked final, it will not calculate or will not total if these fields are not filled out. Just another thing, that was one of the common findings from MCU, is that something is not getting filled out, so it's checking that. It also checks, regardless of if it's a final or a partial billing, it checks these 3 questions at the bottom. Have you checked the report? Make sure that it's correct. Have you reviewed the vocational training stipend with the individual? Do they agree that it's correct? And for the final one, looking at that narrative section, if someone's having difficulty or challenges, is it documenting what challenges they were having and what interventions that you used to help them? So it should be specific to the individual. So your job task might be wiping down tables, but then you should be able to tell an example of our sample report. You can say, did Noah have trouble wiping down the tables? Yes, he had trouble because he did realize when the tables needed to be wiped down, or he wasn't doing a very good job and he was leaving food on the tables, or whatever the case may be. Identify what the issues are and the interventions so that we can see what progress that student has made. So with that, that is looking at the report templates. Hopefully, like I said, we tried to spend a little bit more time this year that we had available to give some instructions, some tips, some issues. I know that we get this comment every year. It would be nice if spell check worked. I would agree. Anybody who's ever been on the receiving end of one of my team's messages knows that I have a terrible time spelling. Unfortunately, it is just not a function that we can enable in the Excel document where we lock it down for a form. That's why we wanted really to make sure that somebody can type their report in Word, but is able to paste that into the Excel document easier than it is with some of the other forms. So we try to incorporate some of our learning lessons into this new form to make it as easy as possible for providers. And with that, I think that was the last slide that we wanted to cover. It looks like we do have a couple questions coming in.
Jim, I wanted to point out too that if anybody wants more training on the report forms, you can go to OOD's website, and there is about a half-hour video that goes over the summer youth forms for this year, and you might find that very helpful because it goes into a lot more detail.
Yes, thank you. I forgot to mention that. Somebody had mentioned that they couldn't find the form. The form itself is located on the provider tab. There's a folder called reports or forms, and you can go in there and pull that up. I think that the number is like 22. Let me check that. I don't know if there's any other questions that come in the meantime, but as I kind of verify that.
And you should notice on your screen questions that are coming in. Jay is answering and publishing those. So as we've been going through this whole training, there's been some questions and answers in the chat box.
So yes, the form is it's for the summer youth is form 21. You do not want to use the form 8. That's a previous form that we have used. So make sure that you're getting it on form 21. Otherwise, the VTS will not be part of that. I know we did get a question from a provider had emailed. If you are using the form 21 with the VTS entries on that, do you have to still use the VTS form? The answer is no. We try to make this as a one complete form that you can bill out all the summer youth services, just like you did with foundations last year. Okay, just looking, we're kind of looking at the questions, so we might be quiet just for a while while we're doing it. There was a question that came in about should students stay on the work site during the 30-minute lunch break? And they were given an example of if there's a McDonald's across the street. I think that's something that as a provider, you should have that conversation with students at the beginning of the session. This is a great question. You could tell students, hey, you need to bring your lunch with you. If you are going to go to the McDonald's, one of the concerns I would have with that is, not all students might have money to do that. In the job coach, you can't just say, hey, kid, you could just run across the street to go to McDonald's and then come back. That gets back into that situation where, out of the physical control site of the job coach. So you can't leave half the group there and then half the group go to the McDonald's. So I think you need to have that conversation, what the plan might look like for that. But I would encourage students just to kind of bring their lunch if you scheduled it that way. Obviously, you can schedule your sessions so that the lunch period is not required as well. Okay, Melanie, I don't see any new questions that are coming in for the group. I know Jay is responding back to some individuals who have maybe some more specific questions to their unique situation. So Jay is responding back to some of those folks directly, but I don't see any other additional questions that would be something that the whole group would be interested in. So we'll kind of give it a last opportunity for folks to ask questions, and then we will go ahead and end the session.
Oh, okay. It actually looks like we got a couple questions about the VTS, and they want to know if the vocational training stipend will be calculated within the invoice, and it will be. There is not a separate form this year for the VTS. And to also let you know, we're going to be having some question and answer sessions on Microsoft Teams, not exactly in this format. It'll be more interactive. We'll be able to see you if you want to be on camera and hear you. You won't have to just use the chat. So those Q&A sessions will be on Wednesday, June 16, Wednesday, July 14, and Wednesday, August 18 from 9 to 10. We'll send out the links to the meetings when we send out the information about when this training is posted. And you can just click on anytime during that 9 to 10 time frame and ask questions during that time and get some answers.
Right. There won't be an actual presentation for those. Those are more question and answer sessions. We've done those over the last couple of years. Melanie had kind of answered questions from providers last year about reports, billings, and things like that. It's just designed to set a time aside that PCMU staff are available for providers rather than providers trying to catch one of us and asking a question. So you can log in during the session, stay for the whole time, or you can log in, ask your question, and then just leave. That's up to you.
Okay, and then if you need support throughout the summer youth season, you can contact the referring counselor or coordinator for specific case questions, contact the AE2 for questions regarding billings, or contact the Provider and Contract Management Unit, or PCMU, for programmatic or service questions. And the Provider and Contract Management Unit is listed on this slide. You can reach any of us at pcmu@ood.ohio.gov or individually for your different areas. The Northeast is supported by Rana Woods. East Central is me, Melanie Seckler. The Southeast area is supported by Jennifer Pollard. Southwest is Ginger Scaife. Northwest is Jim Gears, and then Jay Burns is the supervisor of PCMU. Okay, so I want to thank everyone for your time and attention today. I know we're going to have a really great summer, and please let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much.